Hello, so it is February 17th and camera's back on track, so that's pretty fantastic. So today we're going to talk about success of all learners, like the teacher's role in improving academic success in all learners. Like, what can you do as a teacher to really make sure your students are learning what they're supposed to be learning? Well, that is like the million-dollar question, right? Like, how do we know what we're doing is the right thing? How do we know that what we're doing is really helping our students? So one thing I have to kind of preface before I start chatting about this stuff is that oftentimes pre-service teachers or teachers that are first year teachers go off of their gut, like their default programs. And I may have spoken about this before, but it's worth reiterating because you can't treat what you think is like best practice. So if you have something that's going on in your classroom right now, like if you're in school, like you're in high school, or if you're in another classroom with another teacher, you can't assume what they're happening is the best practices. What I'm saying is that there is research out there that shows us what best practices are in different situations, and it's not always what you have encountered. So for instance, if you're going into the first grade reading room and you are going to be teaching students reading, what you're most likely to be going to is like what you were taught as a student back in the day, or what you have seen other people do while you were a student. That's not always the best practice. So what we want to make sure we're doing is our practices are based in research. We are doing it for the right reasons. We have not just gut feelings why we're doing something. Like I said before, in like effective teaching, there's a difference between a good person and being an effective teacher. We want to make sure all of our experiences with our students are going to be effective. Like, we want to make sure that they have the best quality, the best access, the best information with all of our best practices, because our students kind of deserve that. So with that preface, I'm going to start in on chapter 2, page 60, and it's the teacher's role in improving academic success of all learners. Now, what we've been talking about earlier this semester is like getting to know your students, and if you understand your students and know that they come from a different place than you or have different experiences than you, their reactions are going to be different than you. Every child is coming to you with a different microsystem of experiences and background knowledge. We have to make sure that how we're treating that student is equitable and using best practices. Okay, that's great. So what's that got to do with you? Like, what do you need to be doing that's different? So I am going to start on page 60, and please know that this book is dated. I have not had us buy the most recent edition just because it's so expensive. Hopefully you didn't pay a lot for this book. I mean, honestly, if you got it through the bookstore, I think it cost you maybe $30, and you can send it back or sell it back at the end of the semester. If you bought it off Amazon, sell it again, resell it, throw that thing on eBay. What you're going to be learning during these sessions is just an intro class. I wouldn't want you to spend a lot of money on the books that we're using. That being said, some of the information is dated in here. Okay, so what's the very first thing we need to do is think about where our students are, how are they reacting to the situations around them, their microsystem, their birth order. If you are teaching anything under 3rd grade, the birth date actually has a lot to do with it. Because if you are coming into kindergarten and you have just turned 5, that's a huge difference than a student that is just turning 6 going into kindergarten. That's a year of growth. That's a year of development that's going to be different. So that being said, I often rank my students from birth date, from youngest to oldest, and then I can look at their characteristic traits that way, to seeing what we need to do to help that student that's a little bit less mature to get to the point where the other students are as well. Do you think money has anything to do with your students? Yes, unfortunately, it does. And we'll be talking about socioeconomic status quite often in this classroom, and that's the acronym SES at the top of page 60, socioeconomic status. You're going to be, we'll hit that in a little bit here as well, but I just want you to be aware that another reason that why you can be a good teacher as far as like understanding your students is like where are they coming back from economically. So another thing that we can think about going into our classroom, like some of the interventions and programs that your school might already have in place, and making sure we're using those, making sure we're using our IEPs, which is an individualized education program or process, depending on your school, and that's to help those students who are in special needs. We need to make sure we have different modalities to teach different students different things at different times and keeping that all in balance. So I don't truly believe in learning styles. I believe we all have different ways of receiving that information differently, but we all code it in our brains the same way. So I may be an auditory learner, but when I'm coding that information in my head, it's not always in auditory form. And we'll get to that as well. But just some things that you need to be aware of your students coming into your classroom. So you're going to run into things called differentiated instruction, and what that means is that you're going to instruct differently to hit your students' needs. We'll get to that as well. And also we need to make sure that what we're doing in our classroom based on it has to be based on standards. Like what we're teaching has to have huge impact, but because we have a larger standard, we have to hold ourselves to Common Core curriculum. I know that's kind of like the buzzword these days. It's not always what it's cracked up to be. I'll give you my opinion on that as well. So that in a nutshell is kind of what we're going to be talking about next. In this video for sure, but then in the next coming videos as well, is like how are we going to help our students become the best learners, and how am I as a teacher going to help their success? Okay, let's just jump right in. Socioeconomic status, SES. If you were in our classroom, and what I think I often do is put it up on the board, but since I don't have a board here, I'm just going to put this in words, and hopefully it's easier to understand. And if not, just give me a call or give me a Zoom and we can chat about this. Socioeconomic status. Does money have anything to do with education? Before you answer that question, let's step back and look at a few things that you might not have thought of before. If you are of low economic status, that means you have not a lot of money. What kind of vacations would you take your kids on? The answer might be camping, something local, something free. You can have great family times around a campfire. You take them to the lake, you take them fishing, something that's going to be a little more local and a little less money. Fine, great. If you are of middle socioeconomic status, what types of vacations do you take your children on? Maybe out of state, maybe Disneyland, maybe you're going to a hotel once in a while, maybe you get to go on an airplane. Those are kind of big things if you're in the middle status. If you are of high economic status, what do your vacations look like? If you are rich, where would you take your kids on vacation? Anywhere they want, right? We're going to Hawaii, we're fishing in Alaska, we're going to the Bahamas, we're going to Rome, we're going to, see the pyramids in Egypt, wherever it is. So if you think about those students that are of the low economic status, we are getting different experiences, different world experiences than those who are middle class and those who are upper class. Okay, let's think about Christmas presents. If you are of low economic status, what is most likely going to be a Christmas present that you can give your kids? Maybe something useful, right? Something that they need, maybe a new jacket, maybe a new, my mom and dad always put socks and underwear in our Christmas stockings, right? That's what we got. Something that was useful, something that was practical, something that we needed. No problem. If you are on that middle class, what are some Christmas presents you are most likely to get your kids? Electronics, right? Maybe phones, maybe a laptop, maybe iPad, something that's, of middle class status. If you are an upper class status, what kind of Christmas presents are you giving your children? Possibly experiences, like we're going to go skiing in Vail, or we're going to go to a Broadway musical in New York, or we're going to be doing different things, and I have like the material things of everything I want as a child. Okay, let's pull that back. So now I've got the students of the low economic status who are taking the camping trips and the fishing trips and are getting practical things for Christmas. That background experience mirrors with the students over here who are getting a lot of worldly experiences of travel and different museums and different experiences and different life situations that the other students didn't get. Does that make a difference in your classroom? Yes. It absolutely does. Vocabulary alone is going to make a big difference. How to navigate the world, what the world looks like, different cultures, they have a different understanding of things. And we're all in all these situations, we're assuming we have parents who are engaged in their children's learning. I mean, that's hopefully the assumption, but it's not true for everybody. But we're assuming in this case scenario that they're all having that same interaction with their children. So if you think about like those students coming into your classroom, how can you differentiate instruction when one has so much different experiences than the other? Now, most often, if you are in small town, rural, eastern Montana, most of your students are going to be the same level, and most of your students are going to have the same experiences. Anywhere in a larger community, that is not the case. Even in Miles City, Billings, Bismarck, Jamestown, Fargo, Butte, doesn't matter. Larger communities have different populations of students who fall into those different categories. So you may have a classroom of 25 kids and 5 of them have already been to Europe. Great, that's wonderful. And that's fantastic. But those other 20 are not going to have that experience that other child has. And sometimes money has to do with education level, not because of experiences, but where you can put your children in a school. Does that make sense? So if you are going to Butte and you want them to have like the best private education you can, you're going to be paying for that education. Whereas if you are in Butte and you are of lower economic status, you are going to be in public school system, which is fine, totally fine. But you're going to have different situations, different backgrounds, different situations, like in their reactions to different situations because of the experiences that they've had. So it's your job as a teacher to make the playing field level. Like education is said to be like the great equalizer. If everybody has a great education, everybody has equal opportunity for everything. But we know that's not always correct. What we want to say is we have equity. So you as a teacher, and I'm sure you've seen this little video before, and I'm going to show it to you. Hold on. So this is a little picture that I was talking to you about before. I said video, but I meant picture. So what we see as equality, like if we look right up here, equality means everybody's getting the exact same thing. So if to look over the fence to watch the baseball team, everybody's getting the exact same step. Well, if you notice, this little guy here in the purple is not getting what he needs. So equality doesn't always work. Giving everybody equal amounts is not always what is best. So if we're looking at those students who have different socioeconomic status, backgrounds, if we're giving everybody the same thing, we're not being equitable. I should say we're not having equality. What we need to be is equitable, and that means over here is we're giving each student what they need. This tall guy in the blue shirt didn't need any help, so we didn't give him any help. This guy in the middle needed just a little bit of help, so we gave him a little bit of help. The little guy at the end needed a lot of help, so we gave him a lot of help. That meaning is that we are being equitable and not equal. We did not give everybody the same amount, but we are giving them what they need, so that's equity. The other one here is reality, and this is what sometimes happens, is those who don't need get a lot, and those who need a little get what they need, and then the other one is in a hole. What we really want to look for is like this liberation. What we did here is we took out the fence altogether. So we often give equal in classrooms, but we shouldn't. We should give equity in classrooms. But because our world isn't always ringing true, sometimes this is what happens, when what we really should be doing is doing liberation as well as equity. Like, why do we need a fence there to begin with? So what is in your classroom that's a barrier that you can take away that nobody would need that extra support to get through anyway? Something to think about, and that's a lot to think about. If we can just think about the difference of equality and equity for now, that's what I kind of want to focus on. So even though our students are coming to us with different backgrounds, and we've said this several times, that they are not going to need the same thing from you. They are going to need what they are lacking from you. So you are going to be able to be this equity teacher and give the students what they need. And hopefully we would get to the point where we don't even have to have the fence there to begin with, and we can help our students without that. Okay, so I didn't really get to differentiated instruction. Please read about that in your book. Differentiated instruction is just a blurb in the beginning, I think, of this chapter, talking about different ways we can teach different students to help everybody gain the same amount of knowledge. It's equity. See you guys next week.